Atheism is, in the broadest sense, the absence of belief in the existence of deities. Less broadly, atheism is the rejection of belief that any deities exist. In an even narrower sense, atheism is specifically the position that there are no deities. Atheism is contrasted with theism, which, in its most general form, is the belief that at least one deity exists. The term atheism originated from the Greek theta epsilon omicron sigma, meaning without God, used as a pejorative term applied to those thought to reject the gods worshipped by the larger society. With the spread of free thought, skeptical inquiry, and subsequent increase in criticism of religion, application of the term narrowed in scope. The first individuals to identify themselves using the word atheist lived in the 18th century during the Age of Enlightenment. The French Revolution, noted for its unprecedented atheism, witnessed the first major political movement in history to advocate for the supremacy of human reason. Arguments for atheism range from the philosophical to social and historical approaches. Rationales for not believing in deities include arguments that there is a lack of empirical evidence, the problem of evil, the argument from inconsistent revelations, the rejection of concepts that cannot be falsified, and the argument from non-belief. Although some atheists have adopted secular philosophies, there is no one ideology, a set of behaviors to which all atheists adhere. Many atheists hold that atheism is a more parsimonious worldview than theism, and therefore that the burden of proof lies not on the atheist to disprove the existence of God, but on the theist to provide a rationale for theism. Since conceptions of atheism vary, accurate estimations of current numbers of atheists are difficult. Several comprehensive global polls on the subject have been conducted by Gallup International. Their 2015 poll featured over 64,000 respondents and indicated that 11% were convinced atheists, whereas an earlier 2012 poll found that 13% of respondents were convinced atheists. An older survey by the BBC in 2004 recorded atheists as comprising 8% of the world's population. Other older estimates have indicated that atheists comprised 2% of the world's population, while the irreligious add a further 12%. According to these polls, Europe and East Asia are the regions with the highest rates of atheism. In 2015, 61% of people in China reported that they were atheists. The figures for a 2010 Eurobarometer survey in the European Union reported that 20% of the EU population claimed not to believe in any sort of spirit, God or life force. Definitions and distinctions. Writers disagree on how best to define and classify atheism, contesting what supernatural entities it applies to, whether it is a philosophic position in its own right or merely the absence of one, and whether it requires a conscious, explicit rejection. Atheism has been regarded as compatible with agnosticism, and has also been contrasted with it. A variety of categories have been used to distinguish the different forms of atheism. Range. Some of the ambiguity and controversy involved in defining atheism arises from difficulty in reaching a consensus for the definitions of words like deity and God. The plurality of wildly different conceptions of God and deities leads to differing ideas regarding atheism's applicability. The ancient Romans accused Christians of being atheists for not worshipping the pagan deities. Gradually, this view fell into disfavor as theism came to be understood as encompassing belief in any divinity. With respect to the range of phenomena being rejected, atheism may counter anything from the existence of a deity to the existence of any spiritual, supernatural, or transcendental concepts, such as those of Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism, and Taoism. Implicit versus explicit definitions of atheism also vary in the degree of consideration a person must put to the idea of gods to be considered an atheist. Atheism has sometimes been defined to include the simple absence of belief that any deities exist. This broad definition would include newborns and other people who have not been exposed to theistic ideas. As far back as 1772, Baron d'Holbach said that all children are born atheists, they have no idea of God. Similarly, George H. Smith suggested that the man who is unacquainted with theism is an atheist because he does not believe in a god. This category would also include the child with a conceptual capacity to grasp the issues involved, but who is still unaware of those issues. The fact that this child does not believe in God qualifies him as an atheist. Smith coined the term implicit atheism to refer to the absence of theistic belief without a conscious rejection of it, and explicit atheism to refer to the more common definition of conscious disbelief. Ernest Nagel contradicts Smith's definition of atheism as merely absence of theism, acknowledging only explicit atheism as true atheism. Positive versus negative philosophers such as Anthony Flew and Michael Martin have contrasted positive atheism with negative atheism. Positive atheism is the explicit affirmation that gods do not exist. Negative atheism includes all other forms of non-theism. According to this categorization, anyone who is not a theist is either a negative or a positive atheist. The terms weak and strong are relatively recent, while the terms negative and positive atheism are of older origin, having been used in the philosophical literature and in Catholic apologetics. Under this demarcation of atheism, most agnostics qualify as negative atheists, while Martin, for example, asserts that agnosticism entails negative atheism. Many agnostics see the view as distinct from atheism, which they may consider no more justified than theism, requiring an equal conviction. The assertion of unattainability of knowledge for or against the existence of gods is sometimes seen as an indication that atheism requires a leap of faith. Common atheist responses to this argument include that unproven religious propositions deserve as much disbelief as all other unproven propositions, and that the unprovability of a god's existence does not imply equal probability of either possibility. Scottish philosopher J.J.C. Smart even argues that sometimes a person who is really an atheist may describe herself, even passionately, as an agnostic because of unreasonable generalized philosophical skepticism which would preclude us from saying that we know anything whatever, except perhaps the truths of mathematics and formal logic. Consequently, some atheist authors such as Richard Dawkins prefer distinguishing theist, agnostic and atheist positions along a spectrum of theistic probability, the likelihood that each assigns to the statement God exists, definition as impossible or impermanent. Before the 18th century, the existence of God was so accepted in the Western world that even the possibility of true atheism was questioned. This is called theistic innatism, the notion that all people believe in God from birth. Within this view was the connotation that atheists are simply in denial. There is also a position claiming that atheists are quick to believe in God in times of crisis, that atheists make deathbed conversions, or that there are no atheists in foxholes. There have, however, been examples to the contrary, among them examples of literal atheists in foxholes. Some atheists have doubted the very need for the term atheism. In his book Letter to a Christian Nation, Sam Harris wrote, "In fact, atheism is a term that should not even exist. No one ever needs to identify himself as a non-astrologer or a non-alchemist. We do not have words for people who doubt that Elvis is still alive or that aliens have traversed the galaxy only to molest ranchers and their cattle. Atheism is nothing more than the noises reasonable people make in the presence of unjustified religious beliefs, concepts. The broadest demarcation of atheistic rationale is between practical and theoretical atheism. Practical atheism in practical or pragmatic atheism, also known as apatheism. Individuals live as if there are no gods and explain natural phenomena without reference to any deities. The existence of gods is not rejected, but may be designated unnecessary or useless. Gods neither provide purpose to life, nor influence everyday life. According to this view, a form of practical atheism with implications for the scientific community is methodological naturalism, the tacit adoption or assumption of philosophical naturalism within scientific method with or without fully accepting or believing it. Practical atheism can take various forms. Absence of religious motivation. Belief in gods does not motivate moral action, religious action, or any other form of action. Active exclusion of the problem of gods and religion from intellectual pursuit and practical action. Indifference. The absence of any interest in the problems of gods and religion, or unawareness of the concept of a deity. Theoretical atheism. Ontological arguments. Theoretical atheism explicitly posits arguments against the existence of gods, responding to common theistic arguments such as the argument from design or Pascal's wager. Theoretical atheism is mainly an ontology, more precisely, a physical ontology. Epistemological arguments. Epistemological atheism argues that people cannot know a god or determine the existence of a god. The foundation of epistemological atheism is agnosticism, which takes a variety of forms. In the philosophy of immanence, divinity is inseparable from the world itself, including a person's mind, and each person's consciousness is locked in the subject. According to this form of agnosticism, this limitation in perspective prevents any objective inference from belief in a god to assertions of its existence. The rationalistic agnosticism of Kant and the Enlightenment only accepts knowledge deduced with human rationality. This form of atheism holds that gods are not discernible as a matter of principle, and therefore cannot be known to exist. Skepticism, based on the ideas of Hume, asserts that certainty about anything is impossible, so one can never know for sure whether or not a god exists. Hume, however, held that such unobservable metaphysical concepts should be rejected as sophistry and illusion. The allocation of agnosticism to atheism is disputed. It can also be regarded as an independent, basic worldview. Other arguments for atheism that can be classified as epistemological or ontological, including logical positivism and agnosticism, assert the meaninglessness or unintelligibility of basic terms such as God, and statements such as God is all-powerful. Theological non-cognitivism holds that the statement God exists does not express a proposition, but is nonsensical or cognitively meaningless. It has been argued both ways as to whether such individuals can be classified into some form of atheism or agnosticism. Philosophers A. J. Ayer and Theodore M. Drange reject both categories, stating that both camps accept God exists as a proposition. They instead place non-cognitivism in its own category. Metaphysical arguments. One author writes, metaphysical atheism includes all doctrines that hold to metaphysical monism. Metaphysical atheism may be either a. absolute, an explicit denial of God's existence associated with materialistic monism, b. relative, the implicit denial of God in all philosophies that, while they accept the existence of an absolute, conceive of the absolute as not possessing any any of the attributes proper to God: transcendence, a personal character, a unity. Relative atheism is associated with idealistic monism. Logical arguments. Logical atheism holds that the various conceptions of gods, such as the personal God of Christianity, are ascribed logically inconsistent qualities. Such atheists present deductive arguments against the existence of God, which assert the incompatibility between certain traits, such as perfection, creator status, immutability, omniscience, omnipresence, omnipotence, omnibenevolence, transcendence, personhood, non-physicality, justice, and mercy. Theodicean atheists believe that the world as they experience it cannot be reconciled with the qualities commonly ascribed to God and gods by theologians. They argue that an omniscient, omnipotent, and omnibenevolent God is not compatible with a world where there is evil and suffering, and where divine love is hidden from many people. A similar argument is attributed to Siddhartha Gautama, the founder of Buddhism. Reductionary accounts of religion. Philosopher Ludwig Feuerbach and psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud have argued that God and other religious beliefs are human inventions, created to fulfill various psychological and emotional wants or needs. This is also a view of many Buddhists. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, influenced by the work of Feuerbach, argued that belief in God and religion are social functions, used by those in power to oppress the working class. According to Mikhail Bakunin, the idea of God implies the abdication of human reason and justice. It is the most decisive negation of human liberty, and necessarily ends in the enslavement of mankind, in theory and practice. Quote, he reversed Voltaire's famous aphorism that if God did not exist, it would be necessary to invent him, writing instead that, if God really existed, it would be necessary to abolish him. Atheism within religions. Atheism is acceptable within some religious and spiritual belief systems, including Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, Syntheism, Realism, and neo-pagan movements such as Wicca. Astika schools in Hinduism hold atheism to be a valid path to moksha, but extremely difficult, for the atheist cannot expect any help from the divine on the journey. Jainism believes the universe is eternal and has no need for a creator deity. However, Tirthankaras are revered that can transcend space and time and have more power than the god Indra. Secular Buddhism does not advocate belief in gods. Early Buddhism was atheistic as Gautama Buddha's path involved no mention of gods. Later conceptions of Buddhism consider Buddha himself a god, suggest adherents can attain godhood, and revere bodhisattvas and eternal Buddha. Atheistic philosophies. Axiological or constructive atheism rejects the existence of gods in favor of a higher absolute, such as humanity. This form of atheism favors humanity as the absolute source of ethics and values, and permits individuals to resolve moral problems without resorting to God. Marx and Freud used this argument to convey messages of liberation, full development, and unfettered happiness. One of the most common criticisms of atheism has been to the contrary, that denying the existence of a god leads to moral relativism, leaving one with no moral or ethical foundation, or renders life meaningless and miserable. Blaise Pascal argued this view in his Pensées. French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre identified himself as a representative of an atheist existentialism, concerned less with denying the existence of God than with establishing that man needs to find himself again and to understand that nothing can save him from himself, not even a valid proof of the existence of God. Sartre said a corollary of his atheism was that, if God does not exist, there is at least one being in whom existence precedes essence, a being who exists before he can be defined by any concept, and This being is man. The practical consequence of this atheism was described by Sartre as meaning that there are no a priori rules or absolute values that can be invoked to govern human conduct, and that humans are condemned to invent these for themselves, making man absolutely responsible for everything he does. Atheism, religion, and morality. Association with worldviews and social behaviors. Sociologist Phil Zuckerman analyzed previous social science research on secularity and non-belief, and concluded that societal well-being is positively correlated with religion. He found that there are much lower concentrations of atheism and secularity in poorer, less developed nations than in the richer industrialized democracies. His findings relating specifically to atheism in the U.S. were that, compared to religious people in the U.S., atheists and secular people are less nationalistic, prejudiced, anti-Semitic, racist, dogmatic, ethnocentric, closed-minded, and authoritarian. And in U.S. states with the highest percentages of atheists, the murder rate is lower than average. In the most religious states, the murder rate is higher than average. Atheism and irreligion. People who self-identify as atheists are often assumed to be irreligious, but some sects within major religions reject the existence of a personal, creator deity. In recent years, certain religious denominations have accumulated a number of openly atheistic followers, such as atheistic or humanistic Judaism and Christian atheists. The strictest sense of positive atheism does not entail any specific beliefs outside of disbelief in any deity as such. Atheists can hold any number of spiritual beliefs. For the same reason, atheists can hold a wide variety of ethical beliefs, ranging from the moral universalism of humanism, which holds that a moral code should be applied consistently to all humans, to moral nihilism, which holds that morality is meaningless. Philosophers such as Slavoj Žižek, Alander Botan, and Alexander Barden-Jan Sodakovist have all argued that atheists should reclaim religion as an act of defiance against theism, precisely not to leave religion as an unwarranted monopoly to theists. Divine command versus ethics. According to Plato's Euthyphro dilemma, the role of the gods in determining right from wrong is either unnecessarily or arbitrary. The argument that morality must be derived from God, and cannot exist without a wise creator, has been a persistent feature of political if not so much philosophical debate. Moral precepts such as murder is wrong are seen as divine laws, requiring a divine lawmaker and judge. However, many atheists argue that treating morality legalistically involves a false analogy, and that morality does not depend on a lawmaker in the same way that laws do. Friedrich Nietzsche believed in a morality independent of theistic belief, and stated that morality based upon God has truth only if God is truth. It stands or falls with faith in God. There exist normative ethical systems that do not require principles and rules to be given by a deity. Some include virtue ethics, social contract, Kantian ethics, utilitarianism, and objectivism. Sam Harris has proposed that moral prescription is not just an issue to be explored by philosophy, but that we can meaningfully practice a science of morality. Any such scientific system must nevertheless respond to the criticism embodied in the naturalistic fallacy. Philosophers Susan Neiman and Julian Baggini assert that behaving ethically only because of divine mandate is not true ethical behavior but merely blind obedience. Baggini argues that atheism is a superior basis for ethics, claiming that a moral basis external to religious imperatives is necessary necessarily to evaluate the morality of the imperatives themselves, to be able to discern, for example, that "thou shalt steal" is immoral even if one's religion instructs it, and that atheists, therefore, have the advantage of being more inclined to make such evaluations. The contemporary British political philosopher Martin Cohen has offered the more historically telling example of biblical injunctions in favor of torture and slavery as evidence of how religious injunctions follow political and social customs, rather than vice versa, but also noted that the same tendency seems to be true of supposedly dispassionate and objective philosophers. Cohen extends this argument in more detail in Political Philosophy from Plato to Mao, where he argues that the Quran played a role in perpetuating social codes from the early 7th century despite changes in secular society. Criticism of religion. Some prominent atheists, most recently Christopher Hitchens, Daniel Dennett, Sam Harris, and Richard Dawkins, and following such thinkers as Bertrand Russell, Robert G. Ingersoll, Voltaire, and novelist José Saramago, have criticized religions, citing harmful aspects of religious practices and doctrines. The 19th-century German political theorist and sociologist Karl Marx called religion the sign of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people. He goes on to say, the abolition of religion as the illusory happiness of the people is the demand for the real happiness. To call on them to give up their illusions about the condition is to call on them to give up a condition that requires illusions. The criticism of religion is therefore, in embryo, the criticism of that veil of tears of which religion is the halo. Lenin said that every religious idea and every idea of God is unutterable vileness, of the most dangerous kind, contagion, of the most abominable kind. Millions of sins, filthy deeds, acts of violence and physical contagions, are far less dangerous than the subtle, spiritual idea of God decked out in the smartest ideological costumes. Sam Harris criticizes Western religion's reliance on divine authority as lending itself to authoritarianism and dogmatism. There is a correlation between religious fundamentalism and extrinsic religion and authoritarianism, dogmatism, and prejudice. These arguments, combined with historical events that are argued to demonstrate the dangers of religion, such as the Crusades, Inquisitions, witch trials, and terrorist attacks, have been used in response to claims of beneficial effects of belief in religion. Believers counter-argue that some regimes that espouse atheism, such as the Soviet Union, have also been guilty of mass murder. In response to those claims, atheists such as Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins have stated that Stalin's atrocities were influenced not by atheism but by dogmatic Marxism, and that while Stalin and Mao happened to be atheists, they did not do the deeds in the name of atheism. Etymology. In early ancient Greek, the adjective atheos meant godless. It was first used as a term of censure roughly meaning ungodly or impious. In the 5th century BCE, the word began to indicate more deliberate and active godlessness in the sense of severing relations with the gods, or denying the gods. The term sigma epsilon beta eta sigma then came to be applied against those who impiously denied or disrespected the local gods, even if they believed in other gods. Modern translations of classical texts sometimes render atheos as atheistic. As an abstract noun, there was also theta epsilon omicron tau eta sigma atheism. Cicero transliterated the Greek word into the Latin atheos. The term found frequent use in the debate between early Christians and Hellenists, with each side attributing it, in the pejorative sense, to the other. The term atheist, in the sense of one who denies the existence of God or gods, predates atheism. atheism in English, being first found as early as 1566, and again in 1571. Atheist as a label of practical godlessness was used at least as early as 1577. The term atheism was derived from the French athéisme, and appears in English about 1587. An earlier work, from about 1534, used the term atheism. Related words emerged later: deist in 1621, theist in 1662, deism in 1675, and theism in 1678. At the time, deist and deism already carried the modern meaning. The term theism came to be contrasted with deism. Karen Armstrong writes that during the 16th and 17th centuries, the word atheist was still reserved exclusively for polemic. The term atheist was an insult. Nobody would have dreamed of calling himself an atheist. Atheism was first used to describe a self-avowed belief in late 18th century Europe, specifically denoting disbelief in the monotheistic Abrahamic God. In the 20th century, globalization contributed to the expansion of the term to refer to disbelief in all deities, though it remains common in Western society to describe atheism as simply disbelief in God.